All right, we are back. Second episode of the day. This time we're going to be covering message data. So, message data is how mass transit is able to include large data elements within a message contract and yet not completely crush the broker. So, brokers tend to have a message limit, and even if they don't have a limit like RabbitMQ, putting large messages in them tend to slow them down significantly. So what we've done is MassTransit has an implementation of it's called the claim check pattern, and if you search for that on enterprise integration patterns, you can see the claim check pattern is like, here's a token, here's a string, here's something. In MassTransit, it's a URI, where I've stored this large block of data, and when the message is deserialized, that block of data is then able to be pulled into the message as if it were a property of the message. And the reason we do that is simple. We don't want to have a dependency within our consumer to go out and read the message data. We may change where that's stored depending upon the infrastructure. And because that's an infrastructure dependency, we want that as far out in our application architecture as possible. We don't want our consumer to have to know about that. And yes, we could create a bunch of abstractions and inject those into a consumer, but at that point, why not just let us handle that within the message so that it can be part of the message? So what I thought would be a good use case for this is we have our submit order, and we post an event when that order is submitted so that an external system can generate that order accepted message. What we want to do is we want to say, we need a little more information. So we're going to add a notes field to that, and it's going to be free-form text. It's going to be a string, and everything is going to be great until someone decides to start submitting the phone book as their notes content. And so it becomes very large, and our broker slows down because it's passing these huge messages around. So I'm going to start kind of looking into the code that we have here. And we're going to go start first at our submit order contract. So when we look at our contract for submit order, we're going to add that notes field to the order. And because we know, we could just add that as a string, but as we've kind of already said, that notes is going to get large, and it's going to get really large. So to define a message data property, we are going to say message data of string for notes. Stop that. Now, message data is defined in the MassTransit assembly, which means my contracts is now going to have to start depending upon that, which kind of stinks, but oh well, it's what we have. You're going to get there eventually anyway. So, and the message data has a couple of properties on it, but this signifies to MassTransit that this property is message data, and I may or may not want to store that message data in a message data repository. So we've changed the contract, and right now we don't have to do anything. If we look at where we send this from, which is the API endpoint, which I think is our submit order control, or our order controller. The order controller that calls that submit order, it's still here. It's just now I have this additional squiggle that says, oh, by the way, you have a missing property called, oh yeah, that's fun. I gotta fix that. Called notes. And the analyzer has a code fix for it, but it's wrong. So I have to fix that. But I have this notes property that I want to be able to specify. Now, notes type is message data, and I'm going to get this from the model that's passed in. So I'm going to go add that to the order view model. I'm just going to say that notes equals model.notes. And then I won't need that name because it's the same. And then I will add that property to my notes view model, which is going to be a string. And we'll just make that the same as all the other properties. And it's optional. We don't have to have it. So now we're passing that notes through. It's going to give us this error because I don't think I have the right version of the analyzer. Check. version of MassTransit am I running here? 624, I have the latest. So I'm probably gonna have to ignore that error. I don't know if I can just say ignore that error. This could be fun. I might have to remove my analyzer. That's annoying. Notes is a string. Anonymous type incompatible. Yeah, I don't think I've released that fix yet. So yeah, I'm gonna probably have to disable my analyzer. I don't know if it'll build. It might give me an error. I honestly have no idea. Guess we'll find out the hard way. Okay, so, but we're gonna pass that notes through. It's gonna be a message data. And the submit order consumer is then gonna use that notes to process that information. So let's just say that we want to log the notes out, because for now we are going to do not a whole lot with it. But we're going to add it to this order submitted published event. So to access it, when we get our message, we can say notes equals context.message.notes. Now the type of notes is a message data of string. And that contains multiple properties. Notes.value, which is a task, because again, these are all async. They could be loaded from storage, they could be out who knows where. And then it has an address, which is the address used by the message data repository to retrieve it. Kind of for informational, but you don't really need to use it. And then has value to see if you actually have a value that's present. So we'll use the has value to see if we have one. We'll say if notes.hasValue. And in this case, we'll say string notes value equals await notes.value to get that actual value out of that message data. And in this case, we're just going to, since we have that value, and it could be huge, we're not going to do anything with it, but yeah, we're just going to load that in. And that's how you would access the message data. Now I'll go into some additional parts on that here in a second. The submission of that message data from the controller here is going to come from that view model. If it's present, if it's null, it isn't going to do anything. But we have to configure message data for the bus. So we're going to go to our startup where we're configuring this. And where are we creating our bus? Right, add bus create using RabbitMQ. We are going to also come in here and say x.useMessageData. And we are going to pass it the message data repository that we have. So we are going to use one of the built-in message data repositories. You can see we have several to choose from. One is in memory, which wouldn't do us a whole lot of good. That would just be on our website. One is the file system, and one is MongoDB. I am just going to pick, I kind of want to say I just want to pick the file system. And I think I have to do a directory for this. Yeah, that's going to be fun. I wonder what happens if I pick MongoDB. What does it want here? Mongo URL. I wonder what that looks like. Don't I have one of those in my Mongo config in my other project? Because I think I'm using MongoDB for my service, so I already have that. So yeah, so let's just use that MongoDB connection string. Oop. We'll say we're going to store our message data in MongoDB. You need something else? What else do you need? Database. Oh, okay. Let's call this, I don't know, attachments. Why not, right? So we'll see if that works. We're going to try to store this in MongoDB, see what happens. It'll either work or it won't. We'll find out shortly. So we're going to save that out. We're going to go try to build our website again, see if it actually builds or if the analyzer kills us. Yeah, the analyzer kills us. Okay, so now I get to have the fun of taking that analyzer out until I fix it. I have to figure out why that doesn't show it's compatible. I think I fixed it and didn't. Why is it? Save. Oh man, I gotta take it all the way out. Okay, because it was included by components. Okay, now it's starting the web host. So yeah, I'll have to fix that analyzer. But we now have it compiled. So let's see what happens if we actually send a message. We have our new consumer that we haven't touched yet. We have to update the consumer project as well. So I don't know what this is complaining about. Oh, it's gone now. Okay. But we're going to have to go back to the sample service because we have to add message data to that as well. So for our configure bus, we're going to have the same configuration. We're going to have config.use message data. We're going to create the same MongoDB repository, the same URL, the same database. And then we're going to run our service and see if that comes up, see if it works. So far, so good. Let's go and try to send one order only. Okay, so that's a good sign. We didn't actually have an attachment on there, so there was really nothing to order or nothing to attach because we didn't have any notes, so therefore it didn't write anything. But let's go update our client to actually send some notes. So we'll go back to our client. We're going to update our order model that we submit so that we include some notes. That's that. And when we create that, we will say notes equals new string. And let's just make it a nice asterisk, and we'll make it 1000 times I plus 1. Except we're going to have to add I first. That we get. So we'll start with 1000 asterisks, and each subsequent order we create will get bigger and bigger over that limit. Yeah, that's a good start. So let's see what happens now. So we have our service running, we have our web running. Let's see if this actually works. I want to send one just to start to see if it actually works. And it looks like, where did I call? Check order, check order, check order, submit order. If we look at our service, down here, we did a receive. Well, we know we got to the faulted state because we tried to execute the routing slip. We have the hello world, order ID is, and that's in our saga. So we know that it worked. The submit order consumer worked. He wrote out customer 0. I want to say it just sort of worked, but let's find out for sure. So let's go update our consumer. We're going to stop this service now that we know it works. We're going to stop this service. We're going to go to the submit order consumer. We're going to take that notes value and we're just going to write out notes. Why not, right? We'll see really quickly as the number of messages goes up what we get. So let's start up that service. Now we'll go back over here. We'll say send me one. Oh, yep, there's our notes. Our notes definitely got there. Yeah, so our notes got there. It was pretty uneventful. Let's stop the service because I want to see what this looks like on the wire. So I want to stop this, and I'm gonna send one, and then I'm gonna go into RabbitMQ, and I'm gonna look at my queues because my service is stopped, so the message should be sitting there somewhere. It's in the submit order queue right there. And if I do a get, I can see the message. Now what's going on? So I have a reference. I can see that it stored the message out in MongoDB's grid FS, but I still have the text in the notes. So that doesn't really get me where I want to be, because now I have 1,000 bytes in the notes. Well, with 624 of MassTransit, I actually added some new ways to configure message data. And I believe these are documented on the website. If we go into the documentation and search for message data, and actually spell message data correctly, we can see that the use message data is there. It does say previous messages did something here. We've assigned the value. But there are now configuration options that I can specify. And one of these is an inline threshold. So one of the performance challenges I've seen, and I saw this a lot with testing, is if I don't have a lot of message data, like let's say it's less than 8K or less than 4K, it's significantly faster to just put that in the message than it is to save it out to the repository. Because that way I can have a choice. I don't have to decide on it. So if I assign a string to that value and it's under a certain threshold, I can inline that with the text variable and just have that as part of the message, because it isn't worth going out and writing to Azure Blob Storage or something like that for a small body that just doesn't have a whole lot of weight to it. And this is configurable within the process. There's a static class called message data defaults where you can specify the threshold. You can also specify whether or not to always write to the repository. And the reason I put that in there is because every version of MassTransit prior to 624 expects the message data to be at the repository because it doesn't know how to load it. So for backwards compatibility and for the time being, this defaults to true. So it will still write it to the repository, but it will inline it in the message if it's below the threshold, so that consumers on the latest version of MassTransit won't have to go read it from the repository. So it maintains backwards compatibility with old clients, but sets us up going forward so that we can just stop writing small messages to the repo and reduce the churn on that repository. So a couple new things that were added. So to get that to not be in the message, we're going to generate a few additional messages and kind of look at what that ends up with. So if I come back here, you can see I got the error response code error because it timed out. I'm going to put 8 messages in here this time. So it's going to create 8 messages that are going to be in this queue. If I go to the submit order queue, I have 8 messages ready. I'm going to get all 8 of these. And you can see the first one has the text. The second one has the text. The third one has the text. The fourth one does not have the text because it exceeds the threshold. So the threshold was exceeded, so it doesn't include the inline text. It's still written out to the file system, or in this case MongoDB, but it is no longer inlined in the message. But if I actually go up and start my service now, which I've timed out so it won't matter, but if I go and start up my service, and now go and submit those same 8 messages, or in this case I'll do 10, we can see that they all got their message data. You know, the big giant blobs of asterisks are out there, and they all loaded their message data. It's just they are no longer inlined within the message so that we don't, blow up the broker with large messages. So this is perfect for like images, PDF attachments. Some of the services that we talk to, we get giant XML documents or we get a PDF back, or if we want a proof of delivery, sometimes they'll include like an image of the signature or a picture of where they left the box on the steps. So, the fact that cameras have 12 megapixel cameras now and an image size is like 5 megabytes, it's a little extreme compared to, the previous little signature black and white TIFF that you used to get back. So it's more it's more load on the system to get, call that external service, or have that external service actually call us for a webhook to say, okay, proof of delivery, here's your message. Oh, and here's your attachment, and it's a 5 meg attachment. Previously we could store, the little 3K or 4K image as a message property of byte array, which message data also supports byte array as well as string. But now we can't because it's just too big. It's someone's iPhone camera image and it's just way too large. So the message data gets us around that. The other thing that's kind of nice about message data is once you have it saved, you can forward it to other messages. And if it's already written to the repository, it sends the same URL. So if I were to publish this order submitted message, and let's say I want to add notes to that, I can pass the notes from the original message, which will get that message data property. And if I go to order submitted and add message data string of notes to that event will also have the same URI. It won't save that data back out to the repository. It'll use the existing URN for that data. Now, an interesting aspect of that I should probably cover is if we look at the order controller where it's writing this and it's sending it as a request, because the submit order message has a time to live, we're going to look at that time to live and set the time to live on the message data that's stored inside MongoDB, so that MongoDB will clear that out automatically after the time to live has expired. Well, that's going to create a problem if we are forwarding that URN out. So one of the things that we can specify in startup when we're configuring that application in wherever it is, something called startup. Why don't I just call startup? Yeah. So where I'm saying message data here is here, I would want to come in and do like message data defaults, like extra time to live. And if I want to specify an additional time to live on top of any time to live that is there, I could say this equals time span dot from days 1 and just say, I always want to store it for a day plus whatever the time to live is. And it will add that. If it infers a time to live from the message being sent, it will add that time to that inferred value. The other option I have is I can just always say that the time to live for any message that doesn't specify an expiration is, I could just say that it's, time span dot from days 7 and just say after 7 days, I want it to auto delete. Now it is dependent upon the message data repository supporting it. The MongoDB one does because it has a time to live field. But like Azure Blob Storage has no self cleanup mechanism. So all it will do is it will write a property on the file data for Azure Storage. And then you would need something to go out and scan that and look at that file expiration property and delete that. So you would need like some sort of cleanup process for that. That's left to the reader. Yeah, I haven't implemented anything like that for auto delete. So those are a couple settings that are there. Some people just want to clean it up manually. It just depends on what your needs are. The ability to specify the values and pass those to the message data repository are there. So it's just a matter of using them. The extra time to live is good in this case because I know my request is going to have a 30-second timeout. And if I'm going to forward that on, I want to make sure that lives for whatever my request time is plus an extra day. And I could also change the threshold. I could say that the threshold is 8K instead of 4K. It just depends on what my needs are, but I have the ability to specify that threshold as well. And the threshold will only determine whether it's inlined. In this case, it's always writing to the repository. If I want to change the threshold to 2000, I could. But I could also come in and say always write to repository equals false. And now it won't write the smaller messages to the repo, so it won't waste space on the broker, and they'll always be inlined. And when I forward them, they will inline also. So it's good to know. So with that change in place, if I now go out and jump over to my web, restart it with those changes in place, and then run another 10 messages through, the service is going to pick those up, get all those, and process them. And it's going to publish that event that's going to have that inline message data or the URL to the repo. So that's how message data works. You can write to the repository directly and save things yourself. The ability to just assign a string or a byte array to it is relatively new. And that's in the controller where I'm doing that. So the fact that I'm just passing that string now and having it look at the size, that's a relatively new feature. It didn't used to do that. And when I say relatively new, it's new in 6.2.4. Previously, you had to do things like I would have to actually inject the message data repository into the process, into the consumer, and actually, so like, let's just say that I had injected this in. Previously, I would have to actually come in here and say like notes equals repository dot put, and I would have to put, or I would say put string, and I would have to pass the string of what is it, model.notes. And I would have to specify the time to live value explicitly, or just skip it. I could pass the cancellation token, which I think is, I don't know how that works. Isn't there a cancellation token? I don't know. And I would have to actually await that because it would actually write it to the repo there. And yeah, this, I have to initialize it to something, yes. I'll initialize it to null for now because I'm not doing it. But I would previously have to do that, and I would have to know about the repository. Now, because I've added conventions to the send pipeline, when you say use message data, now you can just say model.notes, and it will know that it's a string, and it will convert it and store the message data at send time for you. So yeah, so that happens now. So it's a lot cleaner. Less dependencies to leak into your consumers and your message producers. So that's message data. It's one of those things that you need when you need it, and if you don't need it, definitely don't use it. I mean, it does add the responsibility of keeping track of some sort of repository for that data as well as the time to lives. MongoDB's GridFS makes it pretty easy because it supports time to live and it's easy to clean up, but you still have to kind of keep an eye on it and treat it as a dependency that has to be available. Plus, anybody consuming messages that have message data have to have access to that message data repository. So that's another concern to think about. But it does save wear and tear on your broker, and especially if you're using like Amazon SQS or Azure Service Bus, they have message size limits that are a lot smaller, like 256K. So if you do have images or things like that you want to be able to attach to a message, and again, you could do this yourself. You could write it to S3 and pass the S3 bucket address or whatever as just a property of the message, but then your consumer has to know how to load from S3. So this gives you a way to kind of insulate your app from knowing where the blob is coming from and just let it be loaded by MassTransit. This does work with routing slip activity arguments as well. So if you have arguments and activity arguments that take some message data, and you can add those. There isn't any automatic assignment for that with the routing slip builder. You have to write it to the repository and then load it on. But in the cases that I've used it, I'm getting the command in the consumer that has a message data property, and I'm just passing that same value to the activity arguments in the routing slip builder so that it uses that same address to load it. So that's message data. Hopefully that's helpful. Give it a try. Give me your feedback. I'll try to fix that analyzer issue so that it doesn't say that it's an error. But beyond that, thanks for joining, and take care.